Part 6 of the Turbo Pajero build. Can you believe it? We've spent so much time trying to get this thing ready so I can take this and put some boost into this engine. Please come along for the ride and I hope you enjoy the episode. For all of those who have been keeping up with the build so far, you would have known that I pulled these off to paint them and obviously modify them, and really lucky it did, because when I did pull apart I noticed that it's actually missing a retainer clip next to the rockers. So that's something we need to fix up, and after we fix that up we're going to go on to clean these up, put some silicone on them, put the gasket in and actually put them on. So let's get to that first. So we need to loosen off this shaft to be able to slide this retainer back on, and looking at the book it's telling me to start in the middle and work my way out. After loosening them all off, slapping this retainer back on is super easy and it just slides right on. Just note that what has happened here is that cam load has come up, hit the retainer, flicking it off, so it is super important to get this right. I noticed that some retainers were wrong on the other head as well, so I went over both and torqued them both up to spec. Now that's done, I'm giving these rocket covers a last wipe down with thinners to remove any overspray. This stuff is so good, it's even removed some of the dried up 20-plus-year-old oil that has caked itself onto the bottom of this rocket cover that even degreaser wouldn't move. Once I'm happy, I move on to the seals. So we got these all cleaned up, we got the old gaskets cleaned up, they're only 6 months old, so we're going to reuse them, but normally you would put new ones in. So, you would put them in, and you would chuck them in your car, you tighten this down, and it should be happy days. But, unfortunately, with the 6Gs, I'm not sure about the 4Gs, but with the 6G metal ones of these, the baffle plate is part of this seal. So what happens is, as oil's draining down the baffle plate, it's actually going on top of this seal, and it can either go two ways. It can go back into the engine, or it can go outside the gasket and over your engine, which you don't want. So what we're going to do is we're going to use some silicone, automotive grade, and we're going to silicone this edge here, and that's going to give us that really nice seal, and then we're going to chuck them on the car. Definitely helps with this, but you got to do it a certain way, so let's get to it. Now for some peace of mind, I've cleaned around the head where the rocket cover seals to, and I'm rubbing a very thin layer of silicone around the face. This is just in case there's any warping or imperfections in the rocket cover or the top casting of the head. I simply put a small amount of silicone on the tip of my finger and work my way around. Once I'm done, I carefully pop the rocket cover on, as I don't want to scratch up that paint. I then use some stainless steel washers and bolts, because there is no way I was putting the rusty OEM bolts back on there after all that effort. Well, don't those rocket covers look mint? So the next thing we got to do is the ignition leads. Now we're not using these disgusting things that were standard on the car. They are null and void and not going to cut it. So these are only 5mm thick and too short because we've moved the coil packs. So we've gone custom. So we've hit up Eagle and they have sent us some of these custom leads, and these are 7mm thick. Would be nice to go a bit thicker, but it's a bit hard to find thicker ones when you're running these. So these are Magna, and the end is Pajero. So they've just managed to squeeze that in, put some nice heat shrink on there, and it looks really good. So now we just gotta put these in and move on to the next thing. So let's do it.
So if you're wondering, when did I measure up those leads? It was after we got the engine running with a new manifold and relocated coil. Damn, that was a good time. So it was easy as using a bit of rope to figure out the extra lengths needed of the ignition coils if they needed to be longer, or mark them with a pen if they needed to be shorter, and getting the measurements sent off to Eagle to get made up. To keep the leads together, I'm using Magna lead holders, and this is just to make sure there's no rubbing and keeps it looking clean.
So now that we've got the ignition cords done and we've got that manifold on, it's time to look at this jank wiring.
And it really is jank. A lot of the plug-ins will need to be replaced down the track, as a lot of them are missing clips to lock them into place. But the wiring itself is still usable, so I'm going to focus on that. And the first thing I need to do is remove all the factory tape and the tape I put on when we started up the engine. This is so we can get the correct wiring lengths and replace any tape that's gone hard and is falling apart. When I'm finally happy with the way the wiring has been ran, I start taping up the branch lines. Now I start where the connection is and I work my way back to the main harness, which stops the tape from coming undone. It's super important that you take your time and remember to leave room for movement and to make sure there is slack at the connection point, so there's no strain on the crimps inside the connectors.
Alright, so we've done two ends. We've done this side, and yes, I do know I have a mow. I'm just wearing this so Josh can get used to the popo, bending him over and giving him a big fat sticker. But let's get back to this. So we've done both ends, and what we need to do now is we need to cut this all up and join them together. Now eventually what you probably will see is when we get the new ECU in, or when Josh gets the new ECU in, he'll probably put an actual connector here, so it's a quick connect, so you can take the engine out and the engine wiring harness is connected here and the wiring harness to the body is connected to the body still, and that's going to be a lot better for him. So for the meantime, we're just going to cut and solder them. Like I said before, we are going to put a plug in there, guys, so I don't want to see too many comments in the section saying, you idiot, you shouldn't weld wiring going to an engine and sensors. I do know that it does sometimes muck it up and change resistance and all that sort of stuff. So anyway, let's get chopping, let's get welding and get this wiring harness done.
So let's talk about do's and don'ts. If you're going down the soldering route or you want to shorten your harness, here's a couple of things you got to keep in mind. 1. Do one wire at a time. That way you cannot stuff up, because accidentally joining your coolant sensor wire to your TPS is definitely not going to be fun. 2. Get your tools ready and get in a comfortable position. You want a good soldering iron, heat shrink of the correct size, a heat gun, a lighter if you don't have a heat gun, and for this one I'm also going to have a glue gun. 3. You want to make sure there's nothing underneath where you're soldering that you do not want to get burnt. For example, nicely painted rocky covers. So it's important that you put something underneath so it's going to protect that paint in case any solder drips. So let's walk through this together. You want to cut the wire where you want to join. You then want to get the other wire and you want to cut that, and you want to leave a cross-section area of about 20 mil. You then want to strip back 10 mil of each wire to expose the copper. Then what you want to do is you want to get your heat shrink and you want to cut a 30mm piece and slide that onto the wire. Then you want to twist your wires together, making sure they're as tight as possible so there is a good connection. Once you're happy with this, you want to get your soldering iron up to temperature and place the tip of it onto the copper wire. You then want to get your solder and you want to press it against the copper to the point where it melts. If you're having trouble starting a weld, I find that if you feed the solder right next to where the soldering iron is touching, this will get things moving. If not, your soldering iron just isn't hot enough. I then get my glue gun and put a bead around the wire, and before the glue cools down, I get that heat shrink and I slide it over. I then get the heat gun, put some heat on it, and watch the heat shrink. At the same time, this squeezes the glue, making a nice watertight seal.
And there you go, how good does that look now? So I'm very happy how that's turned out. A couple of things I could do to make this a little bit better is I could wrap it in this to give it a bit more heat control, make sure none of these wires get hot or anything like that. I think I'm just going to leave it for now, tie it all in, and see how we go from there.
This is a no-brainer, but you don't want a wiring harness just chilling in the engine bay, flopping around like your testicles after a steaming hot shower. Because like your balls, they won't like getting jammed in about or against a hot engine. So I've added in some extra fixing points for the harness and the ignition leads to keep everything looking good.
It looks good to have that turbo finally back on here, looking the part. So the next thing we gotta do now is the water lines. We're gonna get them done because they're gonna be pretty difficult because we are starting to run out of room. But yeah, that looks awesome. Very happy with how it's turning out so far. So we're gonna do that. We're gonna pick them up from the existing lines that went to the throttle body, and we're going to go from there. So let's get to it.
So you're probably thinking flexi pipes for sure, right? Nope. Unfortunately, using flexi pipes is just not on the cards because of where the turbo sits next to the manifold. So we are going old school, we are doing hard lines. And continuing with the theme, we are using fuel lines from a Magna and some old banjo fittings I had laying around. So first thing we need to do is we need to figure out the thickness so we can drill out these banjo fittings on the drill press. Now that we got that banjo fitting back on the turbo, it's time to start bending. Now this can be tricky if you haven't done it before, but like most things, a little practice and you'll be able to do it quite well. I would recommend getting a test piece of tubing and marking it from the end 100mm. Putting the tubing in the bender, line the 0 mark on the bender to the mark on the tubing, and then do a 90-degree bend. Remeasuring to see how much distance is between the bend and the end. As you can see here, there's 20mm. So we get the tube again and we mark a 100mm section out again, but this time we're also going to mark 20mm back. So I'll mark at 80mm. We do a 90-degree bend at the start of 80mm and then we check to see the distance. As you can see here, we're spot on the 100mm mark. So once you know this, it becomes pretty easy.
It's the next morning and last night did not end up being very fun. So it was around 2 o'clock in the morning that I actually went to bed because I was welding these sides, I was brazing them up, and for some reason this side waterline wouldn't braze properly. Every time I was bending the metal tubing, it would crack apart and literally just pull apart my hands, and I was like, what is going on? Because this side welded up fine, no worries at all. Very, very strong weld. So I ended up TIG welding it after trying to braze it 3 times because I was just over it. So yeah, we ended up TIG welding it, and that's pretty much it. So the next thing we gotta do is just weld some little nipples on it so we can put some hose in between the 2 water lines. And we're just gonna clean these up and weld them in. And then we're gonna call it a day.
So me being an amazing mate to Josh, I am sacrificing my airlines for the Pajero. Seems they were the only thing that was still in the shed and the right size for these water lines. After slapping them in the lathe and cutting them down to size and drilling them out, I'm ready to tick the tops of these water lines to get them ready. Once they've cooled down, I get the buffing wheel going and I make these old Magna fuel lines shine. And to keep them shining and stop them from rusting, I am spraying them with 3 to 4 coats of clear coat to make them last. And once they dry, I put them back on the car, connect up the hoses and a mire.
So there we go, we're getting right to the end of this project now, just getting the things cleaned up. We got to do that dump pipe, crossover pipe, power steering, and a couple of little things like a catch can maybe, and fix up this fuel system, make it a little bit cleaner, get rid of these hoses here. But we're getting to the end of it. Now guys, if you want to see behind the scenes stuff, go to greasegarage.org, and also you'll notice that we're giving away one of these bad boys right here. Yep, we're giving away a turbo. That's going to be coming up soon. So definitely want to subscribe, keep up to date with what's going on, because who doesn't want to win a free turbo? I definitely would like to. So that's going to be cool. Everything other than that, keep in touch, and I'll see you in the next one.
Nice going, Shigure. You screwed up royally. I'm sorry. Well, I certainly didn't want him to be the last person I saw before dying, so you kinda did me a favor. I need to get out of here.